In The Sopranos, New Jersey mob boss Tony Soprano must deal with the issues and challenges he faces from the colourful collection of characters he is surrounded by, which include a camel nose, a house, an egg, and a chap-swearing ass muncher. One such issue is Richie Aprile, a scary, volatile, violent and unstable mobster who is released from the can after doing 10 years not a peep, and his first action is to beat up Beansy senseless, a stand-up guy, feeling slighted that Beansy didn't visit him in prison and became successful whilst Richie was eating grilled cheese off the radiator. Intimidating and with a violent allergy to veal parmesan sandwiches, Richie immediately becomes a problem for Tony. He is unable to adapt to the new ways of doing things and has little respect for Tony as boss. There is something quite small about Richie, not just his size, but his scope and thinking, like selling coke on garbage routes. The heat from the feds aside, it just seems like such a small racket for someone who is now a capo and supposedly was a big deal back in the day. The executive game too, Tony making money off guys like Frank Sinatra Jr., sir, bleeding Davy dry for his store, and Richie clumsily barges in and scares off the players, focusing on the minuscule debt Davy owes him when Tony has far more ambitious plans for him. Richie becomes more and more disorientated with Tony's regime, and with a little whispering from Tony's sister Janice and supposed backing from Uncle Junior, he plots to stage a coup. But before he can do so, he's shot to death by Janice for... I forget. What was it again? Before this, there's a classic scene in the show where Richie gifts Tony the jacket, telling him it used to belong to Rocco DiMeo, who Richie beat up, taking the jacket off him as a trophy, and now he gifts it to Tony. To the victor belongs the spoiled. Why did Richie give away the jacket? Because he couldn't fucking sell it. But jokes aside, like the Tower says, you gotta take one jacket off to put another one on. And this was Richie's way of a peace offering, an olive branch after he and Tony had butted heads over the past few episodes. Junior and Tony react awkwardly to Richie's story. After all, he doesn't know that remember when is the lowest form of conversation because he didn't make it to season 6. But was the jacket just a warm and convivial gift? Many fans of The Sopranos think the jacket was actually a veiled threat to Tony. So, let's discuss. I really like this scene. There's so many great things about it, like Junior berating Bobby for touching the car's finish, and in the background Bobby later flinches when Junior catches him doing it again. In a previous scene, Sylvia and Paulie tell Richie to build a ramp for Beansy, and later Richie threatens Beansy saying, "If you ever go crying to Tony Soprano again." And yet he acts surprised that the order to build Beansy a ramp came from Tony in this scene, implying he knew the order came from Tony but still tried to argue a case against the ramp, further undermining Tony by saying, "Is this how you spend your time?" The jacket was there lying in wait. Was it originally envisioned as a way to soften Tony up so he wouldn't have to build the ramp, perhaps? In any case, Junior saying, "Terrible accident that kid had," showing Beansy's sympathy, is his tact way of telling Richie to not fight and accept Tony's decision. Junior says it without telling Richie outright, saving face for him. It's then that Richie accepts, which also highlights that he takes orders from Junior, not Tony. I also love Uncle Junior completely knocking the wind out of Richie, proudly telling his Rocco DiMeo story, saying he later died of Alzheimer's, something which incidentally Junior himself would suffer from later in the show. But it shows how stuck in the past Richie is. He's flexing. But the biggest flex he can muster off is what might have been a feeble old guy who's now long gone dead. I also thought, and I've never heard this interpretation from anybody else, and I might be wrong, but Junior saying he died of Alzheimer's, a disease where a person loses their memory, I thought that was a clever joke, that it wasn't fear of Richie that stopped Rocco DiMeo coming back. It was because he couldn't find his way back, because he lost his memory. It's really difficult for Junior, Tony and ourselves not to cringe with second-hand embarrassment with the way Rich narrates the story. Tony doesn't even recognize it, but Richie is like, "You and my kid brother would have killed for this jacket. Silk lining, fine Corinthian leather, something which isn't real by the way. It's sad and pathetic that he has to hold on to this ancient victory by pulling out an outdated, mouldy, smelly old thing. He gives it to Tony and says, 'It's the jacket,' with no further explanation, implying he thinks it's a crucial part of mob law and further proof for us that Richie lives in the past. Richie in many ways is the proto-Feech, the lesser Phil, also characters who came out of the can and were stuck in the past about how things were in their days, feeling they were owed something and resentful that the world kept turning without them. In the jacket scene alone, Richie mentions Rocco DiMeo, Robert Evans, Rommel, all references to the past. In terms of this gesture being a threat, it could be that Richie saying, "Nobody believed with my size I could carry this jacket." He's saying to Tony, "I took him on and took him out. I could do the same to you." Rocco was clearly a bigger guy, and yet the jacket fits Tony's Rubenesque frame. He's literally dressing Tony in the clothes of someone who he humiliated, in what some will consider a conscious show of disrespect, a power move, infantilizing the current Jersey boss, the idea being that he's reminding Tony he has tremendous moxie for his size, reminding him that he beat up a guy as big as Tony. The cobwebs are now removed. Whenever he recites the Rocco DiMeo story, like later again to Sylvia and Paulie, he does it practically word for word, as if he revises it to himself in the mirror. It's sad really, it shows how little he has to fall back on. However, rewatching the scene and its place in the season, I actually come away thinking it was a genuine, if not awkward way of Richie reaching out. Yeah, it was dumb, but he did 10 years. He's got a right to be a little fucked up. And let's not forget, this is a guy who thinks Janice is mad ripe. In my video, Why You're Wrong about Richie Aprile, I actually argue against this idea that Richie came out of the can and was instantly a deranged maniac who tried to unseat Tony. I do think he's quite misunderstood. There is a period where he does mellow, and it appears he starts to become a loyal soldier. But with Janice in his ear, and a few things not going his way, like this jacket incident, it pushes him over the edge. Check out that video I did on him. Cocksucker had the toughest reputation among Sopranos fans, but he never recovered once I got through with him. After watching that video, you're going to start calling him Little Rick. Rick. But one of the points I made was that Richie did make an effort with Tony, and the gift being genuine is emphasized when he is at Tony's home and sees the maid's immigrant husband wearing it, and he looks utterly devastated. The Manson lamps are turned on and he looks like he's going to go on a killing spree walking out of the house. You Sopranos, you go too far, and by discarding the jacket that meant so much to Richie, showing he doesn't give two hoots, it crushed Richie. Later in the same episode, when he's with the Bevilacqua kid, he calls Tony Two-Face and ungrateful, and he also brings up the jacket to Janice on 2 separate occasions. If this was all a charade to intimidate Tony, why would Richie lick his wounds in front of Janice? He clearly was genuinely hurt. After all, yes, it symbolizes how out of touch Richie is, the old school and the new, the sacred and the profane, but the jacket is his treasure, as he says. It encapsulates a time in his life when he was feared and respected. It's a prize that he chose to give to a man he was having problems with, to bury the hatchet, to let go of the past, to accept the kid Tony as the new boss and to be loyal to his capo, and Tony spits in his face. However, you could still make an argument that he makes that face because yes, he is distraught, but more in a "my threat didn't work, he doesn't fear me" kind of way. That Tony doesn't consider him a considerable enough nemesis. There is room for both interpretations, maybe even a combination of the two. Like I said in my other video, you sometimes never know with Richie whether he's making a sincere attempt at cordiality or secretly plotting to take out an eye, like his "how's your sister" line to Tony, which Tony takes as disrespect, but then realizes Richie was being genuine. But was he? He always seems to have this kind of plausible deniability with a lot of his actions. He tells Tony not to cross the line when he's speaking with him and he's holding a fork. So clearly that's a threat, isn't it? But is it though? Because he was already holding a fork because he was making eggs. You just never know with him, do you? I wonder if there's a connection between him saying, "maybe I'll fuck his wife while I'm there," regarding Beansy and his house, and later he is at Tony's house with Tony's wife, what with him trying to get closer to the throne and all that. He is sensitive to the plights of women after all, but that's probably a stretch. By the way, did you notice Carmelo was, for some reason, sketching AJ's face? And not only that, but it looks like a casting photo for The Exorcist. But anyway, regarding plausible deniability, it's the same here. He says to Tony, "You're not wearing the jacket." Is he genuinely mystified at why Tony is not parading himself around in this much coveted jacket? Or does he want Tony to be seen in a token from Richie Aprile? I think Richie was simply out of touch regarding the jacket. Tony probably thought he was a cool guy when he was younger and liked the jacket. Then he moved on and grew up. Richie, on the other hand, stuck in time, envisions it as an epic relic. "You love this jacket. You and my kid brother, you would have killed for this jacket," he says, while Tony nods along, looking a bit bewildered, trying to work out what the angle is. But for once, there is no angle. Just a sad man who is as much of a relic of the past as the jacket he treasures so much. He's beaming. In his mind, he is doing the absolute best gesture he can possibly do. It also speaks to Tony's disillusionment with the old days, a major theme of the show. Richie is a guy he used to look up to, someone he wanted to be like. Now he's an annoyance, and his thinking is small time. There's something quite sad and profound in all this. When Rich sees the jacket again in Tony's house, it hits him hard. Perhaps his thinking never made it past, "He gave away the jacket." But a more introspective character might have contemplated his place in this new world. He went away, the kids of yesterday grew up, they're adults, they're running the show, and they ain't respecting old arrangements. The tough guy is past his sell-by date and without a home. Walking around in leather jackets and flexing your muscles doesn't cover it these days. Nobody cares about him. He's not respected, as Junior says. As Rich walks away from Carmela, the song says, "Many years have passed since those summer days among the fields of barley." Honestly, it's kinda beautiful and sad. So don't laugh. You ever given away anything, you cocksucker? Something you love? Richie was genuinely proud of himself and his accomplishment. He emphasizes that no one else thought he could do it, but he did. But Tony literally discards it. Carmela says about the maid's husband, "The poor thing. In Poland, he was a mechanical engineer. Here, he drives a cab." She might as well be talking about Rich. In the 80s, he was something to be reckoned with. But today, even if he dies, you can't wear his shoes. But let's go back to the effect of wearing the jacket. Sure, Tony was insensitive. He also has materialist wants and doesn't care about sentimental values of others. It also highlights his lack of respect for the old ways of the mob. But how could he have known that the former mechanical engineer turned taxi driver would cross paths with Rich? Plus, if Tony wore it around Richie, the latter would never miss an opportunity to big himself up, recounting the Rocco DiMeo story, improving his stature at the expense of Tony, as if he's the one who's literally put the crown on his head. If Tony walks around with it, it's like he's displaying clothing that Richie decided he should wear, a factor of Tony's life that has been decided by Richie Aprile. People would also ask about it, where it came from, and Tony would have to say it was a gift from Rich and why, glorifying Richie. As such, whether it was intentional psychological warfare or not, Tony was right not to wear the jacket. But giving it away was disrespectful, and subsequent seasons and repeat viewings of the show make it clear that Tony has poor man management skills. Not calling Paulie in the can, telling Carlo to suck cock, mocking Chris, distancing himself from Puss. These were small things, minuscule slights that had big impacts on the show. It's something that's more obvious when you have the inside of Season 6, Tony, and look back on Season 2. Sure, the first time round we thought Richie was an absolute psycho, but upon rewatches, Tony was an asshole to him a lot, and the animosity could have been buried had he kept the jacket and brought it up once or twice to Rich. "Oh, I was wearing a jacket the other day and somebody complimented it. Oh, it's really nice, blah blah blah, whatever." But it does seem he wrote Richie off after the Beansy incident, whatever happened there. You know, I think it's interesting that we all pretty much assume Tony gave it away. But when has he ever given anything away? Carmela is the one who gives stuff to charity, who gave the maid a TV. Maybe it was her. She probably saw it in the closet and thought, "What is this hideous thing?" Giving it away and restarting Richie's blood feud. Whole thing? Big misunderstanding. So what do you make of Richie and the jacket? Was Tony right to give it away? Or should he have worn it? Was Rich being sincere? Or was he looking to cause some dysentery in the ranks? Let me know in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel and thanks for watching.